We're looking at somewhere in the region of 800,000 a rooftop per annum. Now, that is absolutely staggering. I don't know any dealer group in the whole world that would turn away from that.
Welcome to the Automotive Business Podcast. Every week we sit down with the architects of the industry to throw a spotlight on the margins, the markets, and the machines. Whether you're managing an independent or multinational dealer group, we're here to find the tactical edge in your business motoring world. I'm Adrian Simpson, and today we are going from the forecourt to the future of the platform. My guest today is a powerful force for change in our industry. After nearly 20 years at the Automotive Transformation Group, where he propelled the company to become a global leader in omni-channel retailing, he joined Keyloop as Chief Strategy Officer following their major acquisition in 2024. He is currently the architect behind Fusion, the industry's first automotive retail platform designed to unify every stage of the car buying and ownership lifecycle into one connected ecosystem. If you want to understand how to eliminate friction and finally unlock the 4 times productivity growth promised by AI, you need to hear from this man. Tim Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that introduction. I think I better start by saying I'm not the only architect. This is very much a team game and a collaborative formation of a lot of years of hard work and hard graft in the technology sector. But I'm delighted to be at Keyloop, who I consider one of the leaders in the market. So I'm delighted to talk through our plans and the challenges that the industry faces today.
I look forward to hearing about those challenges. Now, you spent 2 decades living and breathing automotive transformation. You've said that in 2026, operational excellence is the only way to out-retail the competition. Before we get into everything, is the industry finally ready to stop layering tech upon tech and start fixing the foundation?
I hope so. The complexity and the layers of process and the layers of technology that have really accreted over so many years, they've caused so many of the problems that we're now all facing. I think operational efficiency is critical for absolutely any organization to be competitive and hopefully to win in any kind of environment, not just automotive retail. But automotive retail is a low margin industry. We have to compete very hard to maintain an edge. And I think the technology that has underpinned a lot of companies in automotive retail over many years has done a job. But what we've done is we've architected ourselves into a bit of this mess, if I'm quite honest, because we've layered a lot of point solutions on top of point solutions. And those pieces of technology in and of themselves have created processes around the use. In a sales environment, you might have a sales individual who might have to log on to 10, 12, 14 systems in order to complete a deal effectively. It's the same in a sort of an after-sales environment where you've got service advisors and technicians and your workshop managers all having to rekey information from one technology to another. And then at its heart, that creates what I sort of call revenue heat loss. Every time we do this, every time a new process is put in place, every time a new piece of technology is put in place, there's risk. Do we lose that data? Do we lose that customer experience? And also the time it takes for individuals in this industry to perform the functions. So I think it's well known. I think it's a challenge that every organization, not just retailers, but manufacturers and financiers and fleet providers understand. And it is time for us all to really address that problem. And it's not just, I do want to stress this, it's not just the technology vendors that have to resolve this. We have to work with our partners in retail and manufacturing and finance and fleet to get this resolved as quickly, hopefully, as possible.
And let's drill down into some of these things you're talking about. Now, I know from what I've read, you've highlighted that 94% of retailers admit to significant efficiencies. When you look at the typical UK dealership today, where is that friction most visible to the customer? If you're enjoying the Automotive Business Podcast, then why not check out our video reviews on business motoring, where we test drive everything from the venerable Range Rover right through to the latest Chinese SUVs, allowing you to make the very best informed decision for your next fleet purchase.
Obviously, it's the touch points typically for a customer are buying the car. That's the first and most obvious touch point. And then it's their ownership every time they need the vehicle serviced and maintained. And that typically is more cycles, obviously, than buying the vehicle. But at each point, those systems and those processes need to match what is increasing consumer expectation. So if we took the sort of first example of searching for and buying a vehicle, a consumer typically starts that journey online more and more now than ever before. That in itself is actually changing with the advent of AI and large language models. So the nature of search and research is actually changing. But as we get used to the vehicle that we want to maybe obtain or acquire, we hit a dealer, we hit the retail environment where we've maybe located a piece of stock or we've matched it from a consumer perspective and need the availability of a product or a vehicle or a car that matches that need or requirement. We then go into can be a quite protracted sales cycle. Now online, it is typically getting a little bit easier because the tools are right there and able to reserve the vehicle online and we go through our compliance sale. But oftentimes when we hit the dealership or we have to interact with the dealership, the complexity really starts to go up a notch. It's incredibly complicated to create the deal files and do all of the paperwork and move that piece of information through that chain from maybe a sales executive, sales managers and business managers through to actually the point of transaction and the handover of the vehicle. So that's one area where we know that there is friction. A lot of individuals complain that the buying journey is absolutely not optimized and it's not in line with modern day consumer expectations of quick commerce, ability to get goods delivered either overnight or in many economies on the same day now. That's the buying part. But let's look at the ownership part when we talk about hitting the service. We can't book a service online. We can't find the right calendarization and book a slot. It's difficult sometimes to get a courtesy car, for example. And then even after that, if we have booked it, we bring it in. What's potentially the likely cost of that service? A handover, probably repeating a lot of the same things that have been put online. That's a confirmation. That's natural. But all of these things are gritting the gear in terms of a consumer experience. And then once the vehicle is actually booked in, a technician's resolving the issues or performing that service. If there are any issues, amber work, for example, needs some additional service, needs the tyres replaced. What happens then? Emails go out, or is it a phone call? So there are so many links in this chain in order to resolve those kind of consumer expectations and maintain a frictionless experience, that there is that risk that a consumer doesn't feel as though this is as easy as it could be. And frustration, that erodes trust, it erodes obviously retention of that consumer and the potential loyalty.
We're very much coming from this from analysing it from a fleet perspective. What do those processes and those challenges look like for people involved with fleet purchasing?
Again, this is about linking, I think, the whole chain together. The typical fleet purchases, large times they're done on bulk. So we're seeing as well a massive switch from, especially retail, where we work very heavily with a lot of the leading retailers and franchise dealers around the world. More and more of the demand on those businesses is being placed on the individuals that are running those fleet programs within our customers. And there's a different level of expectation. You have a business customer, and behind that there's a lot of processes that need to actually be, if you like, done at bulk on a mass scale. We're also looking at different integers in terms of the way that fleet is maximized in terms of its potential, its yield, and on scale the cost to those fleet users. So you need to bring into more account things like the book value, the car park. You need to look at the longevity. You need to also look at really the servicing side of things, because from a fleet or a business perspective, business uptime is absolutely critical, and vehicles for those users, they tend to look at them as the vehicle is a tool for that organization, and the people within those organizations are using them in order to really be able to optimize their yield and their time. So different horses for courses from that perspective.
This is all very much with following on from the theme, but you've talked about the revenue heat loss. Can you talk to me about that? For a dealer listening to you right now, how can you give them a practical example of how disconnected data literally causes profit to leak out of their business? In an industry that moves as fast as this one, a weekly update isn't always enough. For the daily intelligence that franchise and independent dealers rely on, make sure you're heading over to Motor Trade News. From live market shifts to the latest trade pings, we keep you informed between episodes. You're listening to the Automotive Business Podcast.
We did a really in-depth study a few years ago. We conducted this with a company called OC&C, a very well-respected automotive consultant. And what we were keen to understand was absolutely all of the steps in the chain, from essentially lead or sales opportunity origination through into the dealership, how a sales executive or a sales representative would respond to that lead, the content that is provided and a context of information provided back to the customer, and then really into the sales process. So how does that sales executive transfer the data files, the information, into potentially more back office sales administration individuals who are preparing documentation, making sure that all the deal files are accurately maintained and moved across, presenting those deals and offers back to the actual end user, the customer. And then how do we apply the right finance? And most cars are financed now in a lot of markets. How do you maximize, but also provide a fair, compliant, and well-controlled and secure sales environment back to that consumer? Now, at each and every single one of those links in the chain, we were seeing significant loss. If I talk about responses, if you go back maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago, from my perspective, I was seeing a lot of the marketing activity that my organizations were doing. We were probably seeing half of the leads or sales opportunities generated just not being responded to quickly enough and accurately enough. So you've got an immediate loss in terms of the marketing dollar. Now that's got better. I'm not going to say it's 100%. It's still in high double digits. So every time you're not responding accurately, efficiently, and quickly enough, you are losing marketing dollars. You're losing that opportunity. Then as we move through that sales cycle, and just the speed in terms of the ability to propose deals in order to handhold the customer, in order to respond accurately, adjust the traded values, the stacking of the deal, again, we're starting to see loss there. And what we noticed across that entire sales channel, all of those steps, we were seeing maybe 30% of time just by your sales admin, sales execs, business managers, just moving information through the business and rekeying information, and maybe a little bit of dropout and risk. Now, we basically did some modeling, and this was quite an in-depth study. It was over hundreds and hundreds of rooftops of franchise dealers, UK and European markets, and it ended up averaging, if we could make that link in a chain work properly, if we could effectively manage all the opportunities that came through and convert them into a true sales opportunity, we're looking at somewhere in the region of 800,000 a rooftop per annum. Now, that is absolutely staggering. I don't know any dealer group in the whole world that would turn away from that. But it is all these links in the chain that make that effective. So it's not one thing, It's lots and lots of incremental improvements. But then what we have is we get back to the core problem. And that core problem is a lot of those incremental changes have been improved, or those incrementals have been achieved, but at the loss of the overall experience, and then building in complexity to move the deal along. So I don't know, if you add lead follow-up technology into a business, you've got to move the data into that lead follow-up technology, or an offshoot in terms of live chat, for example. All of that information needs to be shared, moved around effectively, and then back into the deal file and the deal stacking technology. So it gives an increment in one area, but it can often create complexity in another area. And it wasn't just one system. You add another incremental improvement. If you add 10 systems, it's not just that one additional system that you have to integrate. It has to integrate into the other 10 systems to make it consistent. And that has been and is the problem. I call it a layer cake, essentially. We just layered more and more complexity, more and more process, and more technology on. Now, it's a right thing to do for many businesses. It's probably the right thing there and now when you think about the challenges that the market suffers. Margin constraint, you need to do things to keep driving the business, and each incremental improvement works. But at some point, we as an industry, and we as a technology vendor, this is Keyloop, had to really step back and say, hold on, we've got to solve this problem from an entire workflow perspective, and then bring to bear the right data sets, unify those data sets in order to provide a seamless workflow, which really measured or monitored and also mapped to a consumer expectation. So that's where we are really at the moment.
So talk to me about where we are at the moment. What does that solution look like?
So our Fusion product stack, the Fusion offering, so Keyloop's Fusion technology stack, really is about reworking all of that front end stuff. So we really have broken down what we see in terms of automotive retail into 4 areas. First is demand side. So demand is where you're acquiring the customers, you're serving those customers with the right deals, and then you're retaining them and remarketing to them constantly based on their next purchase. So at the right point, in the right time, through their finance agreement and through new vehicles that come in, maybe at the sort of 2.5 years or whatever, through their finance agreement, you're remarketing. It's obviously cheaper to keep customers than it is to acquire a new one. But if you also then look at that from an after sales perspective, we call that ownership. And ownership is really taking account of the onward journey of the customer. So they bought the car. Okay, how do we maximize their experience in terms of the after sales piece? So not just servicing, maybe ancillary products, the upsell, things that enrich the experience of that customer, accessory sales, for example. But then we're now actually touching the dealership, making sure the parts that we expect to be used in terms of that next service are ready and available, so they're not having to come back, or they're not getting delays necessarily. So that's the demand and the ownership, and typically the sales and the after sales part. But underneath that as well, there are 2 more domains. One is supply. Now, supply is really about optimizing inventory within the dealership or the retail environment. That's making sure that the vehicle is not only physically prepared correctly, it's also presented correctly online. So the right imagery, the right descriptions, it's fitted options, it's basically videos potentially, where it enhances the experience of a consumer when they want to buy a vehicle. And then pricing it correctly. So not only sourcing the vehicle and buying, so more tools for dealers and fleet procurement in order to get the right deal and buy right, but it's also about that onward journey and being able to accelerate and increase the turn of stock. So we're moving vehicles through the retail chain much faster. So that's the supply piece. And then the final bit is what we call operate. And operate is really where the dealer has used DMS systems. So these are the technologies that have been used for many years to run the accounting program, HR, things internally that are just keeping that business running. But behind that operate side of things as well is a lot of the data. And the data in retail world, especially franchise world, is obviously driven hugely off of manufacturer data. So we need to make sure that's maintained. All of the certifications, all of the integrations, all of the, if you like, interfaces that manufacturers demand in order to maintain CI standards, they're brought with it in that DMS or that operate domain. So those 4 domains, the demand, the supply, the ownership and the operate, are where we have worked very hard to look at the workflow, the demands on technology, to remove superfluous, if you like, processes, because actually they're not needed because technology can do the thing. It removes an inordinate amount of cost, an inordinate amount of friction. And then obviously we get back to reduction in that revenue heat loss that we talked about 20 minutes ago when you asked me that question.
So you're working cheek by jowl with all those manufacturers all over the world. What changes are you seeing, like domestic and fleet, in the cars people are buying and the way they're purchasing them? What are the trends? For instance, are there any, and I ask this provocatively, are there any legacy manufacturers that should be worried?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to name them. Many of them are customers, but I think there's an awareness across the piece of the challenge. Let's say the onset of EV. EV has been a significant changer or catalyst for change across the industry. We can argue till the cows come home about the rights and the wrongs of it, about the impact on the industry as a whole. And we can also argue about potential subsidization or the artificiality of demand through EVs. But what it has done is it's obviously created a bit of an opportunity for emerging businesses. And you look at the challenge, you look at the Chinese, they have really gone all in and invested a long time ago on EVs, whether they've got some government handouts and support. They are in market, especially in the Western economies, and delivering high quality product now at a low price. And that's obviously making a big impact in terms of the market, especially for more of the established brands. I think the other thing, you look at the way that, for example, in the UK, how salary sacrifice has helped to drive a lot of the uptake of EVs. We've also seen a big swing from private retail into more of those business users. That's changed the dynamics slightly of some of the dealer groups and the focus of some of the dealer groups. I was talking to one dealer group that thinks that their numbers will probably go almost 4-fold within about 18 months in terms of their business customers. So you can see the subsequent focus for those organizations. The impact, again, from a UK perspective, is the margin still the same? Probably not. It's more competitive. You're talking businesses, the margins, etc., etc. You're also seeing in the future what happens when we get a degradation in terms of the support in that piece. We've seen COVID as well as I think, a catalyzer in terms of the onset of the Chinese challengers, because they've been able to scale and deliver and support demand at an incredible rate. The boats from BYD being able to ship 5,000 or 10,000 units over the seas, building their own boats, building their own battery technology. It's significant. But again, you're seeing a lot of, if you like, more established brands reacting. Changes in terms of the model lineups. I was with one of the manufacturers very recently, and they've re-architected the way that they deliver their product to market, where they're providing ICE and EV, but pretty much on exactly the same platform in the same car. So it's not just an EV model and it's not just an ICE model. So you're giving customers choice. Manufacturers back out a lot from some of their EV only kind of architecture as well. I think as well, a backdrop, especially over previous 5 or 6, 7 years maybe, there was a lot of talk about agency. Again, that was really catalyzed by COVID. You saw manufacturers wanting to go direct to consumer. You see a lot of brands nowadays, they want to just have that consumer loyalty and that direct conversation to the consumer. The only problem with automotive is for 100 or so years, it's operated on a distributed risk model. So the balance sheet shifts onto your franchise partners. When you get issues with supply chain, that risk in terms of residuals and that balance sheet resides with, the manufacturer. So that impacts gearing ratios, it impacts all your ability to reinvest in innovation. Forget the rest of and the madness that is going on in terms of the politics, the geopolitical situation, supply chains generally, cost of living. All I would say generally is it seems to me just a more complicated world that we live in nowadays. When I was a lad, it seemed a lot simpler.
I'm interested in that, Tim. How did you get into this? Are you a tech guy? Are you a finance guy?
This is another reason why I love Keyloop, and it's quite cyclical. So my dad was always in IT, and I used to work in his business from probably about the age of 12. Every holiday I used to go in. And one of the things in his business was he actually maintained a lot of what was Kerridge and ADP technology on a third-party basis. This is going back in the 80s. So from an early age, I've always been into technology. I worked in data management. I sold, architected, project managed technology for big banks and things, been in startups, built businesses through bootstrapping them, working in the automotive industry from about 2005 with my brothers, which was an incredible time. We loved it. And of course, at that time, there was really the advent and the explosion of digital, and we really doubled down and focused on that. But as I say, behind the scenes, you had these huge DMS companies. It was ADP at the time. We subsequently became CDK, but held so much sway in the market and did so much for motor retail and dealers. There's just more technology in the marketplace now, more suppliers, more complexity. But that notwithstanding, Keyloop is still, as I say, hugely scaled. We're in a wonderful position in terms of the size and the scale and the access to information, ability to start to serve it. We just have realized we just need to work faster and quicker and innovate much, much more, which we are doing. We're bringing product to market and hopefully really changing this sentiment from being a DMS company of many years, we're sort of 50 years old this year, to a much more innovative and faster moving organization.
I am going to end with a question. I don't know if you are a car guy. There's an awful lot of people who work in automotive but don't necessarily like cars. But I'm going to ask you, if you were a car, what car would you be?
I am a car guy. I love cars. What would I be? I would probably say a Range Rover. I've got an L405, so the older style. The only thing, and I don't want anyone to take this away, potentially unreliable, takes ages to get serviced. It can often break down.
You beat me to it, Tim. You beat me to it. Yeah.
If you work with them, you probably end up falling in love with them. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, hopefully that counts just for the Range Rover in your life and not the rest of the workforce. But it's been great to talk to Tim. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's not every day that you meet and speak to someone who was inducted into the IT industry at the age of 12. Tim Smith, thank you very much.
Adrian, thank you.
That was Tim Smith, Chief Strategy Officer at Keyloop. It's rare to find a dealer who can look at the intricate tech stack of a dealership and identify exactly where the heat is escaping from the bottom line. Tim's vision for the fusion makes it clear. The future isn't about having more tools, it's about having the right connected ecosystem to let your staff actually focus on the customer. You've been listening to the Automotive Business Podcast. I'm Adrian Simpson, and don't forget to subscribe to our newsletters at Motor Trade News and Business Motoring, and we'll see you next time from the forecourt to the fleet on the Automotive Business Podcast.